The morning Daniel opened his garage, he froze in silence. The space that had been perfectly clean the night before was now packed wall to wall with someone else's junk. Boxes, dusty chairs, broken lamps, and even an old treadmill were stacked so tightly that his car could barely fit, and that was when he realized something strange. None of it belonged to him. The quiet suburban street of Maple Ridge was known for tidy lawns, polite waves, and strict HOA rules. Daniel had moved there hoping for peace after years of city noise. But standing in front of that mountain of clutter, he knew something was very wrong. At first he assumed there had been some mistake. Maybe movers dropped things off at the wrong house. Maybe a neighbor needed temporary storage and forgot to ask. Yet when he stepped closer, he noticed small labels taped to the boxes. Every label had the same neat handwriting: garage storage, temporary. Daniel didn't recognize the handwriting, but his stomach tightened with a growing suspicion. Across the street lived Carol Whitmore, the neighborhood's most vocal HOA board member. She loved rules more than friendly conversations, and she watched the street like a hawk. As Daniel stood staring at the mess, Carol's front door slowly opened. She stepped outside with a satisfied smile, and in that moment, Daniel understood something unsettling. This wasn't an accident. Someone had filled his garage on purpose. But what Carol didn't know yet was that Daniel was about to solve the problem in a way the entire neighborhood would be talking about by sunrise, and the twist behind that decision would change everything. Daniel spent the next hour carefully examining the clutter that had invaded his garage. None of it looked valuable. Old picture frames, worn furniture, cracked flower pots, and boxes of random household items filled every corner, but one thing stood out: nearly every box had a small HOA sticker attached to it. Daniel sighed. That confirmed his suspicion. Carol Whitmore was known around Maple Ridge as someone who believed every rule should be followed perfectly. She had once asked a neighbor to repaint their mailbox because the color looked slightly faded. Another time she measured someone's lawn because the grass was half an inch taller than HOA guidelines allowed. Now it seemed she had found a new project. Daniel walked across the street and politely knocked on her door. Carol answered with the same confident smile she had earlier. "Oh good," she said. "You found the storage." Daniel blinked. "Storage?" "Yes," Carol explained casually. "The HOA needed a temporary place for community items. Your garage looked spacious." Daniel tried to stay calm. "You didn't ask." "Well," she replied with a shrug, "the neighborhood benefits from cooperation." The conversation ended there, but Daniel walked back home feeling something unusual. It wasn't anger, it was curiosity, because Carol had made one very big assumption. She believed Daniel would simply accept the situation. What she didn't realize was that Daniel had a completely different plan forming in his mind. And by morning, that plan would turn her temporary storage into the most surprising event Maple Ridge had ever seen. That evening Daniel stood in his garage again, staring at the mountain of items Carol had placed there. The more he looked at it, the more one idea kept returning to his mind: if these things weren't his, then he wasn't responsible for them. He pulled out his phone and quietly took several photos of the clutter. The picture showed everything clearly: boxes stacked high, old furniture leaning against the walls, and random objects filling every inch of space. Then Daniel opened a local community website. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Finally he typed 5 simple words: free pickup. Everything must go. He attached the photos and added his address. Daniel didn't lie in the post. He simply described what people could see in the pictures: furniture, storage boxes, and household items available for anyone willing to collect them. Within minutes, messages began appearing. "Is the treadmill still there? Can I come tonight? Are the chairs available?" Daniel smiled quietly. He replied to each message with the same friendly response: "First come, first served." As night settled over Maple Ridge, Daniel left his garage door open. Cars slowly began arriving. Neighbors, collectors, and curious visitors stepped inside, examining the unexpected pile of free items. One by one, pieces disappeared, but the most surprising moment was still coming, because someone across the street was about to notice the growing crowd. And when Carol Whitmore finally looked out her window, the sight waiting for her would leave her completely speechless. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, Daniel's quiet street had turned unusually busy. Cars rolled in slowly, headlights sweeping across driveways as people stepped out with curiosity. The open garage had become the center of attention. Inside, visitors examined the boxes with excitement. Some carried away chairs. Others lifted small tables, lamps, and decorations. A few neighbors laughed in disbelief at the unexpected treasure hunt happening in the middle of Maple Ridge. Daniel simply stood nearby, greeting people politely. "Take whatever you need," he said with a calm smile. Every few minutes something else vanished. A couple loaded the treadmill into their truck. Another visitor carefully carried away picture frames. The tall stack of boxes slowly shrank as item after item found a new home, and then, around 9 o'clock, a porch light flicked on across the street. Carol Whitmore stepped outside. At first she looked confused. Her eyes moved from the parked cars to Daniel's garage, where strangers were happily carrying away the very items she had stored there. She hurried across the street. "What is going on here?" she demanded. Daniel stayed calm. "Free pickup," he said gently. Carol's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. The so-called storage she had placed in Daniel's garage was disappearing faster than she could react, but Daniel wasn't arguing, he wasn't shouting, he simply continued welcoming visitors. And within the next hour, the impossible happened. By midnight, the garage that had been packed with clutter that morning looked almost completely empty, but Carol still didn't know the most shocking truth behind Daniel's calm reaction, and when that truth finally surfaced, the entire neighborhood would see the situation very differently. Carol stood in the driveway watching the last few visitors carry away boxes from Daniel's garage. Her confident expression had vanished, replaced with disbelief. "The property belongs to the HOA," she said sharply. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Does it?" Carol pointed toward the nearly empty garage. "Those items were being stored for community use." Daniel nodded slowly. "Interesting." He walked to the wall and held up one of the remaining boxes. The small HOA sticker was still attached. "Did the HOA vote to store them here?" he asked calmly. Carol hesitated. The truth was simple. There had been no vote, no meeting, no permission. Carol had decided on her own that Daniel's garage looked unused and convenient. And now the consequences of that decision were unfolding in front of the entire neighborhood. Several nearby residents had stepped outside to watch the unusual scene. Quiet whispers spread across the street as people began connecting the story. Daniel remained calm throughout it all. "I didn't move your things," he said gently. "I just allowed people to take items that appeared abandoned." Carol's expression tightened. For the first time since Daniel moved to Maple Ridge, she seemed unsure of what to say, but the real turning point hadn't happened yet, because the HOA board would hear about this situation the very next morning, and when they discovered how Carol had used someone else's garage without permission, the story would take an even more unexpected turn. The next morning Maple Ridge buzzed with quiet conversation. Word about the free pickup garage had spread quickly among residents, and by breakfast nearly everyone had heard some version of the story. At the HOA meeting later that afternoon, the board gathered around a long table while Carol explained the situation with visible frustration. But as she spoke, something became clear. Several board members looked surprised. "Wait," one of them said. "You stored those items in Daniel's garage without asking him?" Carol shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it was temporary." Another member leaned forward. "The HOA cannot use private property without permission," he said calmly. "That's not how our rules work." For a moment the room fell silent. Daniel hadn't attended the meeting, but the board understood something important. The problem wasn't that the items had disappeared, the real problem was how they had gotten there in the first place. Later that evening, Carol walked slowly past Daniel's house. His garage door was open again. This time it was completely empty. Daniel stood inside organizing a few shelves. When he noticed her, he simply nodded politely. Carol paused for a moment, then quietly said something she rarely said to anyone. "I should have asked." Daniel smiled slightly. That's all it would have taken. But the story wasn't over yet, because the HOA board had already made a decision about what would happen next. And that final decision would bring the entire situation to a surprising and satisfying close. A week later, Maple Ridge received an unexpected announcement. The HOA board had updated several community guidelines. One rule stood out more than any other: no HOA member may place or store items on a resident's property without written permission. Neighbors quietly understood why the rule had appeared so suddenly, but the board didn't stop there. They also created a small community storage shed near the park so shared items would have a proper place. The neighborhood felt calmer after that, and surprisingly, Daniel and Carol eventually found a polite balance. They still waved from across the street, though their conversations remained brief. The garage incident slowly turned into one of those neighborhood stories people told with amused smiles. Yet everyone remembered the lesson behind it. Respect and communication mattered far more than strict control. Daniel never planned to start a neighborhood spectacle. He had simply solved a problem the only way he knew how, quietly, calmly, and creatively, but the unexpected result had changed how Maple Ridge handled its rules forever, and sometimes, all it takes to restore balance in a neighborhood is one clever idea. And an open garage door, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.